We all love New Vegas. You know, we love it. And we love it because New Vegas, it has a certain charm to it, a certain magical quality. And I think that magical quality has been born out of a love, a cherishment for, I don't know where I'm going with this. I like Fallout New Vegas. I like Fallout New Vegas a lot. I think the reason that Fallout New Vegas was so successful is because, in the words of the South Park writers, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, they didn't have time for writer's block. They didn't have time for screwing up. They just had to figure it out. And the game was super broken. The game is still pretty broken and buggy. There's a lot of problems with it, but I do think that there's a charm to that freedom of creativity where they just had to figure it out. They just had to do the thing. And people like that. And it seems that Elder Scrolls almost had its own similar title to New Vegas, but it kind of fell apart. Now, if you don't know the background of Fallout New Vegas, basically what happened is that this came at a weird age in Bethesda Game Studios history where they did Fallout 3. You know what we should do? What happened is that all the way back in days of old, we had the mighty year of 2008. In 2008, we got the game known as Fallout 3. And it did pretty well. It was not a flop or anything. It did pretty well. Before that, I believe it was 2006, I want to say. What year was Oblivion? Was it 2006 or 7? 2006, we get Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. 2008, we get Fallout 3. 2011, we get, of course, the very well-known and beloved Elder Scrolls 5. However, this is the game that really just printed money for Bethesda. I mean, this skyrocketed them into critical acclaim to a level that they had not seen previously. And before this, Oblivion was very well received and beloved. Fallout 3 was very well received and beloved. People loved that game too. Elder Scrolls, though, was like 2011's Elden Ring. Like, it was a game that people had heard of. People were like, they liked the studio, but I don't think anybody anticipated just how crazy widespread the love and hype and interest would be for Elder Scrolls 6. Like, it was one of those rare games that spread past pop culture barriers into the mainstream in ways that very few people, or very few games rather, could ever expect to manage. Like, Red Dead 2 was another game like this. You know, like, I had friends that are not gamers at all. One guy I know who is like 55 years old, works like running a construction company. He doesn't play video games at all. And he asked me how hard it would be to get like an Xbox and play some Red Dead 2, because he had seen the commercials that you could play as a cowboy and it looked amazing, and his friends were talking about it, and he wanted to play it. There's very few games that can do that can make non-gamers want to become gamers. And Skyrim was one of them. And so we, now looking back, look at BGS through the lens of Skyrim. It distorts all of this. Like, it changes how you look at everything before it, right? Because it just makes you think, well, they were always like that. But not quite. I think you could look at Fallout 3 as like maybe the Dark Souls 3 for FromSoft. Elder Scrolls 4, you could say, is like the Bloodborne, and is very well received, has a cult following in and of itself, but it's not like, it didn't sell it as well as some of these other games. But with all of this, the reason I'm pointing this out is because in the context of Bethesda's history, we think now about them selling their IP to do a spin-off game, and it's like, why would they do that? They're Bethesda Game Studios. They don't need to do that. They'll make the games and it'll sell crazy well and they'll be happy. But that wasn't necessarily the case. Back in 2008, what seems to have happened is, after the successful launch of Fallout 3, they decided that they being ZeniMax, the parent company, they decided that they did not want to wait 7-ish years for 2015 to come along. I will get better with this pen, I swear. It's a little clunky. I'm trying to get my my muscle memory with it down. But with all this, like, they didn't want to wait 7 years to get Fallout 4, which is what it took. I mean, it took forever to get Fallout 4 out the door. So they didn't want to wait all this time and have nothing else coming in for the Fallout franchise. Very similar to what has happened recently, where they had Fallout 4 happen. And then what do they do 3 years later in 2018? Well, they come along. Oh my God, that's an 8. I swear to God. They come along with Fallout 76 to try and fill up the gap between 2015 and realistically when we get the next Fallout game, which is like 2030 or later, which is insane that we might have to wait 15 years for another Fallout game. That's just, it is what it is. Took us all this time to get Starfield, and so it's going to take another handful of years to get Elder Scrolls, and then it's going to take another handful of years to get Fallout. So it's probably 15 years before we get Fallout. And that's why we have Fallout 76, is because it's meant to kind of fill this gap of time. But something very, very similar happened where they wanted to come along and they wanted to have something in between 2008 and 2011, or 2008 and 2015. So what they decided to do is sell the rights to a little known studio. Around 2009, they greenlit the production of a game called Fallout New Vegas. And this was sent off to Obsidian Entertainment. They had worked on a lot of RPGs, and they didn't have a lot of super amazingly successful IP at their disposal. So they came in and decided for 2010, I believe it was, they were going to do their own game, Fallout New Vegas. But they had effectively 1.5 years to make the damn thing. And so many of these concepts, so many of the things that they established for that game started extremely ambitiously and then ended up getting walked back because they just didn't have enough time. So one of the best examples is if I pull up the concept art. Concept art is one of the very first things they do when they're working on these video games because it gives them the vision of what they're creating. It tells you kind of the story just by looking at the image of what they want this to be, right? And this image right here was one of the pieces of concept art for the game, where they wanted to have New Vegas be this city with, huge walls around it, but then remnants of the old strip, and then big buildings and open streets for you to walk down. And it was all going to be kind of a seamless thing where you just walk through the barriers, kind of like in Night City into Dogtown. You just walk through and you have access to this whole new area, which is awesome. I mean, it's just vast in scope. Now, what we eventually got was a little bit different. If you have not played Fallout New Vegas, I wonder if there's an interactive map. So here we have the map for Fallout New Vegas. And if we go in here, like this is kind of the core of New Vegas. And how it works is they wanted originally to have these big barriers and walls around the city. Like, let's just say this is the city. They wanted all of these walls around the city, and then you go through a gate like right here, and then all of this is open to you. So if you want to just explore around inside the city, you can do it. There might be a load screen right here, but that's kind of it. What they ended up having to do is that they ended up having to like hard gate it all. So there is a wall. I don't remember the exact like dimensions of it, but there's like that, and then inside that wall is another wall with another kind of load screen, like maybe right there. So this is a zone, and then there's another zone inside that's like this big. And so it's its own zone. And if you want to go in here, it's a separate load screen. And then inside that is like, the inner sanctum area with whatever it's called, the Gomorrah casino and everything. So there's like multiple zones. If you're running around in the open world, you can have a great time exploring, just having a wonderful time exploring, going over here. But then you want to go into New Vegas, you go through load screen, then you run around a little bit, you go through another load screen, run around a little bit, go through another load screen, run around. And then if you want to get back out, load screen, and then you run around. So it's very, very stilted and weird because the game is so open as you explore the whole world. But the moment you go to New Vegas, it's all very, very segmented and broken up into these little areas. And it's basically just because on the hardware and with the time restrictions, they didn't have the time to realize this vision. They just didn't. So they had to take this and then go in and change it. So now instead of it just being open and free flowing, there's going to be a wall that goes all the way across here and that blocks you off. So if you want to go through there, you have to go through these checkpoints. And then over here, there's also going to be another wall that kind of spans over here that keeps you out of that area until they want you to go through it. And that blocks you off. And then there's another big wall over here to keep you in that next area. And it's just kind of frustrating because it's not quite as good as it could have been. But given 18 months was the amount of time they had, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. So what does this have to do with anything? That's a great question. And I'm asking myself that question as well. With all this having been said, like in the context of Bethesda's history, they look back at New Vegas in a very weird way. And I don't have any like clear clips. I've wanted to make like a highlight reel of all of this because it's like there are clips of it, but they're very scattered and kind of hard to find. But whenever Todd Howard or anybody that's an old school member of Bethesda Game Studios is asked about Fallout New Vegas, they get really weird. They get super uncomfortable. They don't like talking about it. They don't like acknowledging it. And how I've phrased it before is that it reminds me of the reaction of like the older brother being asked all the questions about their way more successful younger brother. So like imagine there's two brothers. One went to college, did pretty well, maybe played high school football, but got a knee injury and had to stop playing. Never got to go play college football or be in the NFL or anything. So now he just works as like an accountant in Nebraska. Okay. It's a good life. Nothing to be ashamed about there. That's a good life. But his younger brother is like quarterback of the Seahawks or something, or quarterback of the Cowboys or something like that. And so then he has people constantly talking to him about his little brother and how amazingly talented your little brother is and how successful it is and how much everybody loves your little brother. And he's just here like, I'm just trying to live my life, dude. Can you leave me alone? Like, yeah, my brother's successful. Can you chill out? I don't want to hear about him 24 hours a day. And I think that that's Bethesda with New Vegas. Is they're like, we're making games. We're proud of the games we're making. Why do you have to constantly bring up what our like sibling Obsidian did years ago? Quickly, I know you guys love it so much, but can you just give us a little bit of love? You know, I think that's the thing that drives them most crazy, is that people really, really love New Vegas, and they still to this day refer to New Vegas as the best Fallout game ever made, which for Bethesda hurts because they've made two games with a lot more time involved, a lot more money involved, much bigger teams involved, and they apparently have not made the definitive Fallout game, which I think is pretty telling. And I would probably not have, I'd probably be a little bitter too if I had spent 15 years working with this franchise and then people are still like, no, but I love what those other guys did in 18 months. Way more than anything you've done. Like, I get it, why they might be a little frustrated by that. But all of this to say, they don't love it. And New Vegas came at a time when Bethesda was not quite as overwhelmingly successful and industry leading as they became after 2011. And so the time came eventually where they didn't need to do those spin-off things anymore. And in fact, doing those spin-off games might actually hurt their overall standing in the industry, because if that game was not crazy good, it would reflect poorly on them. Just like to this day, people are constantly referring to like, what's a great example? I mean, people have been saying, and I see this in comments all the time, where they mix up Bethesda Softworks and Bethesda Game Studios. So they'll be like, okay, but we're all like saying that Bethesda is like such a great developer and they made Skyrim and everything. They also released Redfall. It's like, okay, it's under the same publisher, Bethesda Softworks, yes, but it's not the same studio. It's not the same team. Like they're different things, but you know, people just mix them up. And that's because when you're in those same adjacent groups, you're going to be lumped in together. It's just going to happen because of proximity. And so there are potential situations where doing a spin-off game like a New Vegas, if it's not received well, could actually reflect really negatively on your brand and your standing. Even though you didn't make it, you're not responsible for it being bad. It still reflects badly on you. It was recently revealed by ex-Obsidian Chief Creative Officer that if things had aligned a little differently, Elder Scrolls would have had its own rendition of Fallout New Vegas. This was claimed on Twitter by Chris Avallone, who left Obsidian in 2015. He stressed that he pitched various concepts to BGS for the Elder Scrolls, particularly spin-off titles that would fill the gap between games, much like New Vegas did between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Just like we were saying earlier with the MS Paint amazing, stunning demonstration that I did. Voila. Filling in these gaps between 2008 and 2015. And then in this case, Elder Scrolls 5, 2011, all the way to what will probably end up being like, by the time we see it, it's probably like 2026 or 27 by the time we actually see it. So there, he was pitching a way for them to fill in the gap for fans that would want to try Elder Scrolls between those periods of time and are not interested in Fallout 76 for Fallout or in Elder Scrolls Online for Elder Scrolls, which honestly, a lot of the people that love Elder Scrolls or Fallout are just not interested in those MMO type games. So I think it would make sense. But specifically what he said is, this was in response to this, an article by 80 Level. According to Chris Avalone, Obsidian made multiple proposals to develop spin-offs for Fallout and Elder Scrolls, all of which were turned down by Bethesda. And then Chris replied, "This is true. One of Elder Scrolls' proposals, which I pitched, was intended to serve the same function as Fallout New Vegas did between Fallout 3 and 4 to provide more adventures in the setting during the years before the next Bethesda release." Which I think just makes sense. He said that his plan would have seen Bethesda Game Studios release a core game and the next release would be a spin-off Elder Scrolls title in the same world or divergent timeline/era. It seems like something that would be paying off in dividends right now, given that the last major Elder Scrolls title outside of ESO was Skyrim, which was released in 2011. Likely we won't see another The Elder Scrolls game for a while, either, as Bethesda recently admitted, it perhaps announced The Elder Scrolls 6 far too early. I mean, I think so too. I don't think they have like hardly anything created for it. I think they came up with like this little concept art and then they turned it into a quick little cinematic trailer and that's it. I don't think they had anything done. They probably don't even know what the player like is going to be, if the player is going to be freely selected or what. Like, I don't think they have any idea what the game is actually going to be like. But I mean, with all this, we can say it makes sense. You could have filled in the gaps. You could have made some extra money. You could have kept fans more engaged, because this is a long period of time. 16 years between releases is crazy. Not even because like the studio went belly up and so somebody lost access to the IP and so they couldn't make a sequel even if they wanted. There's nothing like that going on here. It's simply just that it's taken them that long to get back to it because their team isn't that big and they're not able to punt through the games fast enough. So it just takes 15 years. And soon it's going to be like a quarter century between some of these games because games are only getting longer to make. Starfield, between their last main single player game in 2015, Starfield took 8 years. 8 years. Yes, they had Fallout 76 in addition. That was predominantly and largely headed up by by BGS Austin, but also apparently BGS Maryland spent a lot of time working on it as well, and that potentially diverted a lot of their attention. But still, I mean, you're talking between major entries and major single player games, which is allegedly their bread and butter, 8 years. So we're at the point where, you know, once they're rotating between Fallout, Elder Scrolls, and Starfield sequel, whenever that comes, you're probably looking at 16, 17, 18 years between some of these entries if each of them are taking 6, 7, 8 years to come along. You know, barring any other potential issues or problems that they run into. It's crazy. It's crazy, but this is just what happens when these game dev cycles become so massive and when you have a lot of IP to sift through and bounce around. I mean, you compare it to, again, like Oblivion in 2006. 2 years later, we get Fallout 3. 3 years later, we get Elder Scrolls 5. 4 years later, we get Fallout 4. Then we get Fallout 76, which we'll not talk about. And then all the way in 2023, we get Starfield a solid 8 years later. So, you know, the trend is not looking great for them. But again, I mean, I think with all of this, it's like, what's the easier explanation? That Bethesda's really worried about brand security and quality and maintaining those high quality standards that they think they can provide, but Obsidian couldn't. Is that more likely, or is it more likely that they're just bitter over New Vegas and they don't want to do it? Based on the interviews I've seen, I think that they're probably just bitter. If you were really concerned with like fan service, I think that you probably would have allowed this type of thing to happen. More than anything, I think it's their baby and they just don't want to share it, which it's up to them. They don't have to share it. Just like everybody's saying, oh, give Bloodborne to like Bluepoint to make a sequel. It's like, it's not that simple. It just isn't. Like if it's their baby and they want to protect it and keep it in their house, they can do it. Like, their prerogative. But I don't think there was ever a chance of this because, again, Bethesda's just really, really bitter about Fallout New Vegas. And it's plain to see whenever you look at those interviews, when they're asked about it, they do the little politician smile. We're really happy our fans like Fallout New Vegas so much. You can tell. They're really bitter about it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? But it's not a surprise, in my opinion. I think that this makes a lot of sense, and given their reactions previously, is just really funny. The big question is whether Phil Spencer is going to try and broker some sort of deal between these studios. Is he going to come along and try to connect Fallout IP, maybe, with Obsidian? Now they're under the same corporate roof. There might have been contract negotiations. There might have been things locked down where like Bethesda retained the rights to all of their IP within their wheelhouse, and Xbox can't just take those IP away. Maybe there's special stuff like that in the paperwork that complicates things. I doubt Xbox would have done that. I don't think they would have for 12 billion or whatever it was. So I don't think that they would do that, or 7 billion. But with all of this, I mean, I do think that there's a chance. I think there's a chance that we see a sequel to New Vegas, or a remake of New Vegas, or we see something in the Elder Scrolls franchise that's similar. Probably not anything, within the next few years. I think we get Elder Scrolls 6 before that. But I would not be surprised at all if we see something Fallout related in the next couple of years coming from one of those Xbox teams, just because it makes too much sense to not let that franchise sit on ice. Like they should do something with it. It just makes too much sense. Avowed, yeah, they'll get Avowed out the door. I don't think Avowed is going to be world shaking. I think it's going to be kind of like the Outer Wilds, or Outer Worlds rather, which they're also making a sequel for. But I think it's going to be something like that, where it's probably like really solid. The core fan base will love it. It'll do okay, but I don't think it's going to be like a cult classic or anything. They've struggled to land one of those in a while. Except, of course, the Stick of Truth. We all agree. Stick of Truth is stunning, brave, and beautiful, and a fantastic game for friends and family alike. But I think we probably see something like that come out in the next few years, because it just makes too much damn sense. Sure do. What do you think the game engine's going to be for Elder Scrolls 6? It's going to be the creation engine again. No, if they were getting rid of the creation engine, they would have said so already. It's going to be the creation engine. They'll probably call it the creation engine 3, and a bunch of dumbasses will be like, oh, it's like a new engine now all over again. And it's going to be the same BS. We're going to be making the same videos then that I was this past year. And you guys will be here and being like, oh, no, like just like Luke said last time, it's just a marketing thing. It's just relabeling it. It's the same thing, just with some upgrades. But like, if you hate driving Ford Pintos and then they come out with the Ford Pinto 2, guess what? It's still a Ford Pinto. You're probably not going to like it. Okay. Like, it's not that complicated. But every time people are like, well, but it's a 2, so it's new now. No, dumbass. No, it's not. Supposedly they actually started hiring engine programmers after Starfield's failure, but I'll believe it when I see it. Well, they've been hiring those guys for years, because they always are doing engine work. Like, even terrible engines require constant work. So I wouldn't say that means too much. He took my thing.